What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are here with a story called Emperor Doom, where Doctor Doom successfully conquers the world. But this story was written back in the 80s, right? Technically in the late 80s. So it's less about, the crazy antics of Doctor Doom, and it's more almost kind of like a psychological study of Doom and whether or not the Avengers actually saved the world by ultimately defeating Doom. But initially, this guy takes over the world. And so what this does is it leads to, or at least it picks up with a dinner between Namor the Submariner and Doctor Doom. And the idea here is that with Namor as a character at this point in time in Marvel, we're not that far removed from stories like Atlantis Attacks. Technically, Atlantis Attacks doesn't happen until 2 years after this story in 1989, but the reason why this matters is because at this point in time in Marvel, Namor the Submariner is very similar to Black Panther in the sense that Black Panther would let the world burn to the ground before he allowed something to happen to Wakanda. Namor's the same way when it came to Atlantis. It doesn't matter what anybody does in the surface world, destroy the surface all you want to, launch nukes, kill the entirety of the human race. But the instant you attack Atlantis, it's on like Donkey Kong. I haven't used that phrase in forever. I love that phrase. But what Doctor Doom does here is that instead of presenting himself as somebody who's looking to attack Namor, he actually approaches him as an ally. And in fact, over the years in Marvel Comics, Doctor Doom and Namor kind of have an on again, off again ally type situation, right? Where they work together or sometimes are enemies, different things like that. It's why in Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, Namor went to Doctor Doom and Doctor Doom took offense to the fact that Namor didn't come to him first because they'd known each other for so long and they had kind of been friends for so long and sort of bonded over the fact that they were both essentially kings. But what Doctor Doom does is he presents Namor with something called the Psycho Prism. And what he does is he invites him to look around this restaurant, something Namor doesn't initially do, not really paying attention to his surroundings. And he's like, if you notice, no one here is questioning the fact that I'm here. And no one here is questioning the fact that you're here. It's basically just people going about their normal lives almost as if we weren't here at all. And for the most part, even when they deal with us with a kind of kindness. There's no fear, there's no concern there. And he tells him it's because this prism is derived from the powers of the Purple Man, Zebediah Kilgrave. And most of you guys know, if only because of the Jessica Jones TV show, that the powers of the Purple Man is that he emits pheromones that allow him to control your will. So you end up doing whatever it is that he wants you to do. Only those individuals that have the highest level of willpower can overcome the abilities of Purple Man. But even then, if he takes you by surprise, then you're not going to be able to focus your willpower effectively in a way to overcome his powers. And so that's exactly what Doctor Doom does here. Not necessarily to Namor, he just kind of presents him with this and says like, you are my ally. But beyond that, what Doctor Doom also does here is he kind of spills the beans on what it is that he wants to do regarding the powers of the Purple Man in relation to Earth, that he wants to conquer it because he truly believes that he can make the Earth better than it is right now. Now, of course, given the nature of Purple Man's powers, it of course requires Doctor Doom to bend the world to his whim. And at the end of the story, there's going to be this kind of great philosophical moment where it's going to ask, was the world better off under Doctor Doom's control? Right? It's a really, really, really great moment here. So of course, Doctor Doom and Namor the Submariner end up leaving, right? Once this whole plan and everything is brought together. What is really funny here though, is that Doctor Doom, when he's leaving the restaurant, the server's like, are you ready to order? And he's like, order? Little man, this establishment may be suitable for setting an example, but do you truly expect me to eat here? I would never eat in such destitution and squalor. I eat in opulence, right? Like America's, or at least New York City's most fine dining establishment is considered destitution and squalor to Doctor Doom. Like it's just, it's one of those hilarious, funny little moments. But Namor still has a question, right? Like, why are you bringing me in here? And the response of Doom is because you are, or at least have been, an Avenger and are tied closely to the Avengers. And there are a handful of people out there in the superhero community that I simply just cannot gain access to and who will have the ability to override the powers of the Purple Man. And so what he does is he presents them with what are effectively obedience discs, for lack of a better word, right? These devices can be placed on these artificial individuals and it'll force them to follow commands, right? So essentially a machine operating as if they were under the control of Purple Man's influence, right? And so at that point you switch over to Simon Williams. And as crazy as it might sound, Wonder Man is actually a guy who's going to be kind of a, not really a major player, but a catalyst for the Avengers' success in this story. Now, Simon Williams is a guy who gains his powers from ionic energy, but even within the confines of Marvel at this point in time, they don't fully understand how his powers work. The only thing they really know here is that Simon Williams was exposed to the ion ray of Baron Zemo, and then gained like your normal fare of powers, right? Superhuman strength and speed and durability and so on and so forth. But when he died the first time and then came back, he was almost kind of perfected in the sense that he didn't really have true flesh and blood anymore. He had what passed and looked like flesh and blood, but was actually just kind of a solid ionic compound that had encased his body. So he really is a being made of pure energy. And that's why Tony Stark is just kind of like, we're just gonna perform, right? A little science experiment. You're a being of pure energy. Don't you have any curiosity about the nature of that energy, about its properties, its possibilities? So Tony Stark is kind of trying to figure out what all could be done with the nature of somebody like Wonder Man. Does he want to convert the whole human race into ionic energy? No. But there's any number of applications that can be used if they can figure out how his body works. Healing factors and curing illnesses and different things along those lines. And so Tony Stark puts him in what is in effect a kind of body analysis tank, right, essentially. And he's going to stay in there for like 30 days, right? And then once he comes out, they'll be able to study his body's composition and all that kind of cool stuff. Because Namor the Submariner is effectively on the outs with the Avengers at this point in time, when he shows up in Avengers Mansion where Vision is, Vision's like, you're not supposed to be here, right? And like, initially, Namor just like goes to try to attach the device to him. But because of the fact that Vision can make himself intangible and any number of things, he's able to kind of like, bob and weave. And so Namor brings in Scarlet Witch, right? Because at this point in time, her and Vision were still a thing, as well as Star Fox, right, the brother of Thanos. Now, Star Fox is under the control of Namor the Submariner, given his crystal, as well as Scarlet Witch. And so, because of the fact that Namor tells Star Fox, just start choking Scarlet Witch to death, that of course Vision doesn't want to watch his wife die. And so Vision just gives in. He allows, Namor to attach the device to his head. Namor makes him dance around as a kind of display of the fact that he has total control of him, which is a little weird, right? When you imagine Vision, this essentially overly serious character in Marvel at this point in time, just kind of like dancing around. I'd like to imagine that he's listening to Dancing Queen by ABBA, but still, right? At that point, Namor just kind of continues on this path. The next person that he ends up visiting is Aaron Stack, also known as Machine Man, but it's less about him visiting Aaron Stack and more about visiting basically Garvin, the guy who kind of helps Aaron Stack with his devices and so on and so forth. Because Aaron Stack is a character known as Machine Man, so he is effectively just kind of like engineered in a lot of ways. He's more machine than man, although not really twisted and evil. But the fact is, right, like when he's getting these kind of upgrades and whatnot, because Namor was controlling Garvin, what this does is it leads to Garvin attaching the disc to the back of Machine Man, having no idea of the fact that it was done. And so at that point, you switch over to Doctor Doom and Purple Man with the two of them talking to each other. And this is one of those moments in Marvel where up to this point in time, we didn't know the limits to Purple Man's powers. We knew that there were surely people out there who, by whatever manner and means, could overcome his abilities, but we didn't really know that you could do it through sheer willpower. And so where Doctor Doom has Purple Man in this gigantic crystal and is amplifying his powers with the intention of seizing control of the world, the Purple Man just kind of goads him, right? He taunts him. He's like, no one can stop me, right? Eventually I will get out of here, and when I do, there's going to be hell to pay. And so Doctor Doom just like makes everybody leave the room. And then he goes inside the crystal with Purple Man himself. And Purple Man tries to use his powers, and Doctor Doom overcomes them, right? Like Doctor Doom is just not controlled by them at all. Now, over the years in Marvel, there's been a kind of back and forth where Marvel's teased the idea that this was actually a Doom bot and it wasn't really Doctor Doom. But at the time this story was written, it was legitimately Doom. It was not a Doom bot of any kind whatsoever. So it was one of the first times in Marvel that you saw that if a person had a substantive enough level of willpower, they could overcome the influence of Purple Man. It's just being able to pull that off. And so at that point, what you end up doing is you pick up with the rest of the West Coast Avengers team, Tigra and Hawkeye and these guys, And you end up finding out that what goes on here is that where Namor had directed the Vision to erase all video documentation of Namor's appearance in the West Coast Avengers mansion and him dominating, Vision and so on and so forth, that video footage was sent to a backup. And in fact, it was sent to the West Coast Avengers, right? The kind of minor league Avengers team, I guess, the secondary team, if we want to call it that. But of course, they respond, right, as you would normally expect them to. And they basically go on the affront against Doctor Doom in Latveria. The reason for this being that when they were analyzing the footage and when Namor was talking about, an island that was used by Doctor Doom and so on and so forth, that Tigra did some digging around and she discovered that Doctor Doom had essentially used shell corporations to buy an island out there, and that this is clearly something that Doctor Doom is behind. Now, they don't fully know the extent of what Doctor Doom is up to, but they know enough to know that whenever Doctor Doom is doing a thing, it's usually a bad thing. And so they're like, let's go figure out what this is and let's go try to stop him. Now, in what universe would anybody believe that the Avengers West Coast team could defeat Doctor Doom? That's anybody's guess, right? I mean, no one, they would never do that. Like, that's never going to happen. But then you pick up with Namor, and Namor goes after Ultron. Now, this is a really, really fascinating exchange here, because the way that this is written, as most of you guys know, Ultron hates humanity. Ultron always wants to destroy humanity, that kind of a thing. Ultron hasn't really been seen since in Marvel for quite some time, of course, since the whole Pymtron, when he merged with Hank Pym and that kind of thing. But I imagine Ultron will return relatively soon in Marvel at some point, hopefully, fingers crossed. But one of the things that happens is that because Ultron is so arrogant and so full of hubris, and Ultron believes that all of humanity is below him, that Namor uses this and basically starts manipulating him, right? Kind of starts goading him to the point that because of the fact that Namor can withstand the energy blast of Ultron, that he's like, your energy blast can't even deal with me, a person who's half human, right? And so because of that, Ultron ends up going on the physical attack against Namor, which is exactly what Namor needed, because that allows him to attach the disc. So it's not huge, but it's just kind of a little manipulation regarding the character of Ultron. And it's pretty awesome, right? It's a fun little moment, right? The way that Namor thinks and how well he knows both villains and heroes within the larger superpowered community. But of course, once you pick up with the Avengers West Coast showing up to Doctor Doom's facility and so on and so forth, it makes no difference, because by the time they get there, Doctor Doom activates the machine. The broadcast, or the kind of huge energy source of the Purple Man, is spread throughout the world, and everybody bends to his will. Like, literally everyone everywhere across the world is now under his control. In fact, 2 days later, he appears to the United Nations, and what he says here is fascinating. He says, please, there is so much that we must do. You may applaud me later. The world is in chaos, on the brink of destruction, all because of petty differences and squabbling. The only hope for global peace is the election of a single leader for the entire planet, an emperor of the earth. I would be honored to consider such a position. In fact, I doubt that a formal vote is even necessary. A show of hands should indicate my support. And of course, everybody votes for him. Now, is it really much of a choice to vote if your will is coerced, right? And you just are forced to vote for that person in the first place? Probably not. But the next thing that happens is Namor, because Namor initially turns on Doom and he says, no. You said you were going to rule the surface and I was going to rule the seas. We had a bargain. And the response of Doom is, no, I mean, we had a bargain so long as I needed you, and I needed you to be able to get close enough to those various members out there, those artificial people, to have obedience discs attached to them, but I don't need you anymore. So you can go away now. And initially Namor is just okay, that's not gonna happen. But that's where Doctor Doom reveals that the nature of the psycho prism that he has in his possession, sure, it allows him to bend other people to his will, even if only on a smaller level, but the more he holds it, the more of an influence it has on him. And that's where you end up finding out he's basically been under control of Doctor Doom this entire time. He simply didn't know it. And that's where he becomes an agent of Doom, just like everybody else. And so again, this is where the story gets fascinating. And this is kind of where I want your input in the comments section. I want to know what you all think about this, because what it says is, in the days that follow, amazing things occur with amazing speed. In Afghanistan, Russian troops begin an unconditional withdrawal. In Ethiopia, deserts bloom. thanks to a redistribution of land and an influx of technology from countries that were once that kingdom's sworn enemies. The rule of South Africa is turned over to the black majority and the country is admitted into the United Nations. The stock market blooms, interest rates fall, production rises while crime and hunger dwindle. Armies begin to disband, remaining at skeletal levels to aid in natural disasters, and all because of one man, Doctor Doom. So the question to ask here is, yes, Doctor Doom is doing all of this using the powers of Purple Man to control humanity. But is it a bad thing? Right? I mean, it really brings in this kind of philosophical question, right? If humanity was capable of making the world better and they were able to do it on their own, why haven't they done it yet? And is it necessary for humanity in a lot of ways to kind of be treated like children, right? That they can't make good decisions on their own, as evidenced by the state of the world. So they need to be made to. Or is it important to ensure humanity allows that free will, not so much to make the world perfect now, but that when humanity makes the world a better place, it stays that way, because that world is improved based on past lessons as opposed to subservience. So again, it's a really, really interesting philosophical question that's kind of presented here. But of course, at that point, you switch over to basically Wonder Man coming out of this gigantic tank. And it's the thing that Doctor Doom didn't account for. He had no idea any of this was happening. So when Wonder Man gets out, you end up finding these small things. For example, like the Avengers mansion is being turned into like Latvia's summer home and all that kind of stuff. And Doctor Doom is, reworking all these things. And in fact, when Simon Williams looks at like a broadcast on television, and Doctor Doom is being hailed in like a parade, and they're like, yes, like Doctor Doom granted independence to Puerto Rico and that kind of thing. And all this stuff is celebrated. Simon's like, something's wrong here, man. The world doesn't celebrate Doctor Doom. Like, when did Doctor Doom become an emperor? Like, this is crazy, right? And so, of course, he tells Captain America and he tells, everybody who's here, like, we got to do something about Doom. Like, something's wrong here. Now, because Doctor Doom, with all of his power, had seized control of the White House, even though he considers it to be, less opulent than he would like, Captain America directly calls Doom and informs Doom of what's going on. And of course, he's just kind of like, okay, like grab him and bring him in. But he also studies Simon Williams. And what he learns is that because Simon Williams doesn't breathe, right, because he doesn't really need to, that he cannot inhale the pheromones of the Purple Man. So he'll never truly be influenced by the Purple Man's powers unless it was some kind of modified version of the obedience disc. Simon Williams is very, very unique in his physiology among the entirety of the superhero and even supervillain community within Marvel Comics. And so, of course, when the Avengers go on to try to, bust Simon Williams and, put the cuffs on him and bring him in, he helps them understand in no uncertain terms, I'm one of the strongest people on your team right now. There's nothing you can do to stop me. So ultimately, he escapes on a kind of flying motorbike, I guess is what it is. But ultimately he goes underground. And the reason why is because even when he gets out there, because Doctor Doom has control of everybody in the world, everyone is his army. So they all go after Simon Williams the instant they see him from his picture on TV. And so with him kind of going underground and basically staying hidden, he will ultimately re-emerge. But you switch over to Doctor Doom, who actually just kind of like is placating a situation. And that's where the true defeat of Doctor Doom in this story comes from, because there is a dissatisfaction here, right? There is a total dissatisfaction. He says, so long have I sought to control fate, for indeed my failure to do so in the past has ever been my downfall. And the manifestation of that desire has been a lifelong dream to rule the world, a dream that has now come true. And yet, in the dream, I rule as conqueror, not administrator. The fight for victory is a noble one, but of what worth is victory devoid of challenge? Somehow the dream has grown hollow. I had thought Simon Williams might provide substance, but he seems to have fallen off the face of the earth, leaving me with little to concern myself over but small little things, right? Just the trivial matters of basically being a pencil pusher, right? Like that's really all he is now, because he solved all the world's problems. There's no problems to cope with anymore. And so Doctor Doom is wholly and entirely bored. As a ruler, he is completely bored. And so you pick back up with Simon Williams, and Simon Williams travels back out, right? And just kind of goes to like the Avengers West Coast mansion, kind of looks into everything and looks into the footage of what happened with Vision and learns about the nature of Purple Man and his involvement with Doctor Doom and all that kind of stuff. Now, the cool thing here is that it does give a little insight into the nature of Purple Man's powers for people who were reading this comic at the time and didn't really know a whole lot about him outside of what was initially given to us at the beginning of the story. But in effect, it's everything that I told you, right? He emits pheromones when you breathe them in, he can totally control you, and there's not much you can really do to stop him. But of course, this also leads to Simon Williams going after Captain America. And the reason why is because Captain America is the focal point of the entirety of the superhero community. Everything revolves around him. Everybody trusts him. It's how Captain America in Secret Empire was so easily able to basically conquer North America and take out most of the superhero community. One of the best stories ever in the history of Marvel. But one of the things that happens is that Simon Williams manages to physically restrain Captain America, and then it's almost one of those things like They Live, right? You know, where you have like Roddy Piper who's talking to like Keith David, and he's like, put on the glasses, put them on, and like shows him the world as it really exists. That's exactly what happens here, right? That you have Captain America being forced to watch reality, memories of his own friends' stories, right? Where basically Doctor Doom tried to kill Captain America, he's fought the Avengers countless times, and ultimately it brings Captain America back, right? It allows him to regain his sense of self, and he's like, we have to stop Doctor Doom. Now, one of the things to know is that by and large, once you overcome the abilities of the Purple Man once, it usually doesn't affect you the same way anymore, right? It's almost like a kind of mental immune system for the Purple Man's powers. And so that's where Simon Williams and Captain America are kind of like, okay, how do we bring everybody else under this? Because surely we can't just like physically grab everybody and make them look at a computer screen. One, because you broke it. And two, because not all of them may react the same way. Their minds could potentially shut down, right? They could just go crazy and basically die. Like any number of things could happen. So they concoct a plan. And it's genius. What Captain America does is he brings them in, right? The other members of the Avengers, Hawkeye and Janet Van Dyne, Tony Stark, brings them into a room and says, hey, so this is an experiment that Dr. Doom wants us to do, Emperor Doom wants us to do here. We're gonna implement it in public schools, but he wants to make sure it works on us first, right? And basically it's gonna show you a bunch of really fast-paced images, but it's really going to register on your subconscious. That's the only way you're really going to see it. And they're like, sure, let's do it. So they sit down in front of the monitors, and literally Captain America's like, fingers crossed, Simon Williams, like, I really hope it works, because if it doesn't, we're gonna be kind of screwed. And so like all these images flow through, and like Hawkeye stands up in probably one of the funniest moments, and he's like, we've been had. It's one of the funniest moments with Hawkeye and Marvel. Like, I absolutely love the way that it happens. And so, of course, it's kind of like, okay, like, they're woken up to reality. They know what's actually going on. And so at that point, the Avengers kind of like make their move, right? They're like, okay, let's all get together. We got to go get Mockingbird and Hawkeye and so on and so forth. But what they realize is Hawkeye's not there. And so when they find him, essentially his wife's just out cold. And he's like, I tried to tell her what was going on, because at this point he's married to Mockingbird, right? He's like, I tried to tell her what was going on, and she called Dr. Doom and told him everything, so I just knocked her out, right? This guy literally cold-cocked his wife. And he says it in like no uncertain terms. He's like, I slugged her. Right, and it's just kind of like, dude, I mean, you can't just be going around hitting your wife, man. But, well, okay, Avengers assemble, right? Like, they just take off to go after Dr. Doom. Now, of course, information is given to Doom himself that, like, there is a hypersonic jet, right, that is heading for the island directly. Now, the coolest thing here is that Captain America does not go out and build, like, a gigantic team to attack Doom head on. It's the smartest thing to do, because the more people you have, the more difficult it becomes to maintain order and structure. But by having a small little strike force of essentially 5 people, that they can all play these small individual roles. And when you have key people like Janet Van Dyne, who can shrink down to the size of the Wasp, she can get into areas where normally Dr. Doom wouldn't expect. The bigger problem that they have to contend with here is Dr. Doom was informed of their coming by Mockingbird. And so what this does is it leads to like Dr. Doom's guys launching an attack, and you guys have absolutely seen this meme on the internet before, where like his scientists shoot everybody and they're like, yeah, we got them, right? Like they're dead, they're gone, like it's, cool, we won. And Dr. Doom's like, my greatest flaw, I surround myself with idiots. Because of course they got out, right, using like an ejection button, and they're on the island making their way towards Doom himself. And so what follows here isn't really the most interesting. I mean, it's just a bunch of action sequences, right? It's them like attacking some of Doom's forces, which are basically just robots and, little things like that. And there really isn't a whole lot doing. I mean, they hold their own and it's just like, yeah, man, like we're fighting giant robots and so on and so forth. What's really interesting here is that Janet Van Dyne's job is to actually sneak in while everybody else essentially works as a distraction to get into the room with the giant crystal and to deactivate it. Now, of course, Namor the Submariner sees Janet, and in turn, he's just kind of like, okay, like, we got to grab this girl. And he does, right? I mean, he grabs Janet and starts, choking her, while the rest of the Avengers, after having made it through Doctor Doom's forces, get into the room. But Janet's the one who figures it out. One of the big differences between Namor the Submariner and like Aquaman at DC Comics, for example, Aquaman has to return to water every once in a while in order to keep himself from dying. And that's one of the things that was established, for example, in like, what was it, Tower of Babel, where he was away from water for too long because he was made afraid of water and ultimately it weakened him. Namor's not necessarily like that. He was in the very early days, and while Aquaman was modeled after Namor, in order to kind of separate Namor and Aquaman a little more, add a few little levels of differentiation between the two, Marvel kind of took that weakness away. So he can stay on land as long as he wants to, but he's fine. And that's where Janet figures out he's been away from water for too long, that his willpower is weakened, that he himself is a little weaker than he used to be. Not so much that it's going to kill him, but enough that it makes him easy to subdue, as is the case with Doctor Doom. Hence why Doctor Doom had him going on those missions in the first place, a multi-pronged plan. So Namor shatters this water tank, right, which all this water comes pouring in from the outside into Namor, and he regains his resolve, back at 100%, right? Namor the Submariner, the avenging son. And so at that point, Doctor Doom is watching everything happen from the White House, and initially he almost like presses this button to send all this nerve gas into the facility that would actually kill everybody. But he's like, you know what? Maybe we should just let fate decide, right? Let fate decide how things happen. And this leads to Namor destroying the entirety of this crystal, and the entire influence of the Purple Man no longer has any effect on the world. And so what starts happening is the world goes back to the way that it was before. More so than that, because of Doctor Doom's actions, the world is less trusting than it was before. So a lot of these positions that countries held, where they kind of looked at other countries with a bit of a skewed perspective, like, I don't know if I can trust you. Now they're like, I know I can't trust you, and I know I can't trust you. I can't trust anybody. And it makes all these different countries incredibly paranoid. And so over these months that Doctor Doom had control of everything, it all snaps back and goes away in an instant. And so, of course, following that, Captain America and the Avengers are like, we got to get Doom. And Doom's like, that's not going to happen, right? I'm going back to my country, right? I'm a sovereign nation. You can't attack me in my own place. That's not going to happen. Doctor Doom disappears, and that's effectively it. Namor goes back into the ocean. But the cool ending here, right? The cool philosophical question that we're kind of left asking is that as the Avengers are flying away, the news is turned on by Hawkeye, and it says conflict has resumed among the Iran-Iraq border. And in related news, Russia has filed a formal protest with the United Nations, accusing the United States of masterminding the recent takeover by Doctor Doom. And again, it just kind of goes on. And that's where Captain America is just like, the world isn't perfect, Hawkeye, but people are free to make their own choices. And that's the way it should be. And Hawkeye's just kind of like, if you ask me, Cap, things are still a little muddy in that area. In fact, there's only one thing we know for sure. We've done humankind the greatest favor in history, or we've done it the greatest damage. And either way, that's something we're going to have to live with for the rest of our lives. So I'm going to leave the question to you guys. Right? Did the Avengers actually save anything? Because sure, humanity was under the total control of Doctor Doom. They couldn't do anything without Doctor Doom telling them they could. But there was also peace on an unprecedented scale. There was no starvation. There were no more border skirmishes. There were no more wars and massive losses of life. The Avengers returned it all to that. So sure, they gave humanity its free will back, and they sent the world spiraling right back into chaos. So the question to ask is, who actually did the most good in this story? Doom or the superheroes? With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed it, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.